About 2 years ago, I was in Barcelona and someone introduced me to a gentleman that had started a social enterprise that was helping train migrants and undocumented workers for hotel and restaurant work. And I went and looked at this place and realized that it was a rich research opportunity. And because Davide and Ana Chiara live in Barcelona, this was a perfect opportunity for the three of us to work together on this social mission project. We realized that it was a very complicated enterprise with a business integrating all these social characters, from social agencies that work with migrant workers to the hotels and restaurants that end up taking on undocumented workers that are trained. So this is how we found the project, and since then we've realized there's a lot of other places like this. There's a brewery in Italy that's training prisoners so that they can get jobs when they get out of jail. So there's rich opportunities in this area, particularly from a supply chain perspective.
Yes, thank you so much. So basically, we know that supply chain management literature usually consider folk organizations that are profit oriented, and they manage their supply chain according to a commercial logic that basically prescribes to sell products and services on the market to produce an economic surplus that it's then ultimately appropriated by the firm owners. On the other hand, we have some more recent studies looking at socially oriented enterprises like NGOs that follow a social welfare logic, which instead prescribes to make products and services or advocating for addressing a social need. But these two models have both some shortcoming in terms of their social impact, in the sense that traditional companies, they are basically prioritizing profit over the social impact, while social enterprises sometimes might lack funding and financial viability because they depend on external sources for funding. So when you consider the scope of social impact supply chain management, we think that focal organizations that are embedded into a more complex institutional environment that is characterized by both social welfare and commercial logics experience potentially conflicting institutional logic, because they can lead to incompatible prescriptions. So in our studies, we focus on the case of social enterprises that are hybrid organizations, in the sense that they address complex social problems through resources that are generated by competing on the market. So an example would be this Italian company called Semini Libertà. They are basically employing prison inmates in the craft beer supply chain. And so basically by doing this, on the one hand, they address a social inclusion mission, which is to train and place inmates in the beer supply chain when they basically end their term. And on the other hand, they compete on the market because they sell craft beer. And this is used to self-sustain their social mission. So basically, we think that social enterprises like this one adopt hybrid organizational models because in order to deal with multiple logics, which affect their strategies and structures, both internally at the organizational level and at the supply chain level. So their hybrid nature of their social impact supply chain managements refer really to this integration of multiple logics in their decision making, in the sense that when you make supply chain management decision, you are prioritizing social objectives and you're not solely focusing on profits, and therefore you serve multiple purposes. And classic supply chain management decisions that we look at in our article that are affected by this hybrid model are supply chain management strategies, stakeholder identification and engagement, and also the relationship management style you apply with these stakeholders. So basically in social impact supply chain management, we take the perspective of social enterprises as the focal organization managing a supply chain. And we propose that social impact supply chain management is different from traditional supply chain management because it can handle institutional complexity. and it produces different kinds of supply chain management decisions. So our theoretical foundation basically is the institutional logic perspective over social impact supply chain management, which basically allow to explain how the focal organization respond to multiple competing logics. So even though social impact supply chain management strategies and practices, they can be context specific, but one common aspect that they all share, that all social enterprises share, is the need to blend in their supply chain both commercial and a social welfare logic. In general, institutional logics are considered as principles that basically drive organizational behavior and help organization interpret reality and give a specific meaning to success, to what success is. And in presence of institutional complexity, an organization needs to address potentially conflicting logics, and it requires to evolve its management approaches. So in the same line of reasoning, we propose that social enterprises that act as the focal firm in their supply chain, they adopt different social impact supply chain management approaches and respond to multiple institutional logics in a way that differ from traditional supply chain management. And basically, we analyzed some exemplar social enterprises and their supply chain, and we realized that their supply chain management strategies, the role of stakeholders in their supply chains, and the way they manage relationship with these stakeholders is different from what we know traditionally in supply chain management. And that's what we elaborate in our study. So basically, the main result is that social impact supply chain management approaches that we look at, they position in a continuum, in a sort of continuum between purely commercial and purely social supply chain management styles, depending on the different prioritization of the commercial and the social welfare logic and their enactment in classic SCM decisions. So on the one hand, you have purely commercial supply chain management approaches where that are typically studied in our literature, and on the other hand, you have purely social supply chain management approaches that have been studied recently by scholars in humanitarian scholar NGOs. So in these polar approaches, basically you have that one logic prevails and the other logics is not necessarily addressed, or it's not assimilated in a meaningful way. So on the one hand, it's a more simple situation, it's a simplified situation and can facilitate managerial decision, but on the other hand, it comes with some of the shortcomings that we have discussed, because on the one hand, purely commercial supply chain management style might result in a limited scope and a limited social impact. And on the other hand, purely social supply chain management approaches can have can be financially unstable and can depend on external funding. So the hybrid approaches of social impact supply chain management in between these two polar approaches are those that we address in our study.
So in our paper, we propose the continuum of social impact supply chain management approaches. The main characteristic of this continuum is the fact that focal organizations on the continuum integrate social welfare and commercial logics at different extents. Specifically, it might be that in some cases, one of the two logics is core and the other one is peripheral. And this is the case of the extremes in our continuum. Instead, it might be that in our cases, the focal company has at its core both social welfare and commercial logics. And this usually happens in between of our continuum. So we proposed the three possible approaches, and we named them decoupled, combinatory, and coupled social impact supply chain management. The first approach, the decoupled social impact supply chain management, is at one of the two extremes of the continuum, and this is the case in which the commercial logic is core and the social welfare logic is peripheral in supply chain management. It might be the case of a multinational corporation which already has a commercial supply chain in place in its home country or in developed countries, and identifies market opportunities in an emerging market. The focus organization might decide to set a new supply chain in this market and define it as a socio-commercial supply chain, meaning that they will use it to market poor people and people in need, and at the same time increase their sales and provide a social impact. The fact that the commercial logic is core in this type of supply chain means that the main goal of the supply chain strategy is to increase the profit of the organization. However, the decoupled social impact supply chain management is different than traditional supply chain management, because the focal organization will need to actively interact with local social entities, NGOs, government and regulators as intermediaries that might be needed to extend the brand of the organization in this new market. And the focal organization might be called to establish a relationship with this type of organizations and stakeholders. Then we have the case of the combinatory social impact supply chain management approach that is in between of our continuum. So in this case, we have that the focal company is usually a social enterprise which has at its core both social welfare and commercial logics and applies them in supply chain management. In most of the cases, the social enterprise, the core at focal in this supply chain, decides to involve people in need in the supply chain, and this might be done downstream in the supply chain, and people in need might act, for example, as distributor of a product or a service, or they might act upstream in the chain, and they might act as suppliers or producer for the product or service to be sold. On the other side of the chain, there will be traditional market entities and for-profit organizations. In this case, the social enterprise will have to operate in a quite complex network and establish different types of relationship according to the supply chain partner with whom it's interacting. So, for example, in the case of supply chain partners which are people in need, they may need to establish collaborative, long-term and altruistic relationship. In the case instead of traditional market entities, the focal organizations might be called to establish more formal and transactional relationship. The last case that we consider is the decoupled social impact. The last case we considered is the decoupled social impact supply chain management approach. Also, in this case, at the core, there will be a social enterprise which is managing both a social welfare supply chain and a commercial supply chain in parallel. What happened in this case is that the main logic of the social enterprise is the social one, and the commercial supply chain is used to feed the social welfare supply chain. One example could be represented by the so-called work integration social enterprises, which are social enterprises aiming to provide job opportunities to people in need. In this case, for example, the social enterprise might need a social welfare supply chain to identify potential people in need, to train in their organization, and then place in the job market. In parallel, this social enterprise might manage also a commercial supply chain, because during the training, people in need might produce a service or a product which might be sold. And so in this case, the social enterprise might put in place a commercial supply chain to to sell this product or service to remunerate the social enterprise operations so that these resources can be used in the social welfare supply chain. This is also a quite complex setting for a social enterprise in which they might need to select well their partners. And one way could be to select partners that has in common the goals and the mission of the social enterprise. In this way, they might establish collaborative and trust-based relationship to achieve a common goal. For example, on the social welfare supply chain, the social enterprise might be collaborating with our social entities sharing the same goals, and on the commercial side, they might interact with commercial and for-profit actors, but actors that also understand the goal, the social goals of the social enterprise, and would like to be associated with it. So we started this project asking ourselves if businesses could solve social problems in a long term and in a sustainable way. And what we saw is that most businesses remain profit-oriented. This means that, for example, even if they find a way to treat a major disease, they might decide to price at a very high price this treatment to remunerate their shareholders. Another example might be the case of multinational organizations who implement sustainable operations and supply chain management practices, but in the end they do less harm rather than really providing a positive social impact. On the other side, it might be that social enterprises, such as NGOs and humanitarian logistics, might be dependent on external funding to achieve their social goals, and so they provide a temporary impact and not a long-term impact. So for this reason, in this study, we have been fortunate to study social enterprises which are different than the other organizations. They have a social goal, and they try to achieve these social goals by creating themselves the resources needed for it. And in this study, we show that this is possible by it's possible to do this, for example, by defining an hybrid supply chain management strategy, which means a supply chain management strategy based on both a social welfare and a commercial logic, and it's also possible to define it in a way that social goals are prioritized over commercial goals. Also, we see that this is possible through interacting with a broad network of stakeholders and establishing collaborative and trust-based and altruistic relationship with the different partners along the supply chain. And we believe that these insights, this way to manage the supply chain, might be useful for social enterprises, but also for any kind of focal organization that would like to achieve a social goal at different extents. And we believe that this is true for for-profit organizations, for purely social organizations, and we have seen that recently this kind of organizations have also started to include some of the principles of the social enterprises and somewhat adopting an hybrid supply chain management strategy. So what we hope is that through our study, through pointing the attention to this kind of social impact supply chains, will help organizations to consider an hybrid way to work and to organize the supply chain to achieve social impact in a long term.
In the future, we see lots of opportunities of places to go with this research. For example, we have a colleague in the UK that's been looking at solar installations in Haiti, Africa, all over the world, which integrate a lot of different players in the supply chain, from nonprofits to social enterprises and for-profits and financing groups. So we wanted to compare the ideas that we came up with for our continuum with one of the the supply chains that he's working with, because we see a great case comparison between our case on Mesclades and his case of the social enterprises working in the developing world. There are a lot of other places to go with this research. We really hope to help a lot of other social impact organizations become more financially viable. So we see a lot of case-based research on that, and potentially doing some survey research if we can find enough players that are doing similar types of social impact work.